My guest today is Lena Gilbert, and we originally were going to be talking about a remembrance service and event associated with the 75th anniversary of the liberation of the concentration camp Dachau, of which Lena's two parents were survivors. But of course, the pandemic has put all events pretty much on hold. But we didn't want to let the occasion go by without remembering it and talking about that event in particular and the Holocaust Remembrance time in general, because April is generally when we do that. So first off, Lena, welcome.
Thank you.
Great to see you. Thank you so much for making the time. So talk to me just a little bit. Let's start with, obviously, your parents were both Holocaust survivors. Was there much conversation about what they went through in your house, or was it something that as time went by and we realized the importance of annual and formal memories of that terrible time, that was when they wanted to talk more about it?
Well, early on as a youngster, there wasn't a lot of talk, at least in English, in the household. They may have been speaking about it in their other languages, in Yiddish or in Polish, but I knew that my parents were survivors of this horrible thing called the Holocaust. I knew that our family was unique. Every family has something that makes them unique, but I knew that the unique definition of our family was that our parents were not American born. They were both born in Poland, and I knew that they were survivors of the Holocaust. And really, it wasn't until the early mid-70s when I was in high school here in Cedar Rapids at Washington High School, and the history class was up to whatever chapter in the history book about World War II. And I was quite appalled that in the big, thick history book, there was a couple of paragraphs about the Holocaust. And I found that to be just hugely appalling. And I told my teacher that my parents were Holocaust survivors, and my teacher asked if my parents would be willing to come and talk to my class. Well, I talked to my folks about it, and my dad wasn't so keen on the idea, but my mother said she would come and talk, she would do it. And well, word got around to some of the other instructors. Well, next thing we knew, it wasn't just going to be my class. They wanted to create an assembly and have the lecture be in a bigger area. So my mother came, and a petite woman, and this was her first major public speaking engagement at George Washington Senior High School in the mid-70s. And it was a standing room only event. And students and faculty were all very moved by her firsthand account of what really happened. And from then, that led my parents into giving more and more public speeches about what happened during those times. They spoke to other school groups, they spoke to church groups, they spoke to civic groups, they spoke to police academies. And after they left Cedar Rapids and moved to Los Angeles in the mid-80s, then they became very involved with the Wiesenthal Center, the Museum of Tolerance. They were regular volunteers there, speaking to hundreds and hundreds of visitors and organized group gatherings at the Museum of Tolerance on a weekly basis.
Meanwhile, back in Cedar Rapids, eventually the Thaler family would create the Holocaust Remembrance speaker, or we would bring in someone to talk in our community across several events. But in a way, what you put together with your parents at Washington way back when presaged and set the stage for all that came after.
I believe in some degree that is an accurate statement. We were trailblazers, so to speak, and it was very difficult. If you put some context around it, my folks, of course, liberation was April 29th, 1945 for Dachau. All the different camps and had different liberation dates, but for Dachau, it was April 29th, 1945. So putting context around that in terms of a timeline and their emotional and physical recovery, they came to the United States, to Cedar Rapids, Iowa in 1949. There are some early Gazette articles from the late 50s showing photos of our family sitting around looking like, quote, a normal family on a sofa with nice clothing and artwork on the walls and lamps, and my father wearing a suit and tie, and we all looked normal. But so the late 50s, my folks started getting interviewed in the newspaper just 10 years after coming to this country, just 15 years after their liberation. So my arithmetic's a little rusty, a little rocky, but we're talking the mid 70s. That's not all that far from when this event occurred. And to think that they had the courage to be willing to come forward and talk to groups in public was a huge accomplishment in their recovery.
This spring would have been the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Dachau, which was the concentration camp that your parents were in. I know that the events had to be canceled, but you do have a few artifacts for those who are watching the video, things that were created for this. And if you would show on the video and then kind of describe for our radio audience what you have.
One of the things that we were going to do at the event was to auction off this lovely piece of artwork that is sitting behind me, which was commissioned by local artist, singer, songwriter, writer, Sam Wise, who's now moved back to the West Coast. But I asked, Sam has been involved in the planning of the event, and reluctantly, I asked her if she would like to create a visual piece for the event, and she did not even hesitate. Immediately, the imagery of what she wanted to do came to mind. She showed me a couple of rough sketches. We talked about it, and I said, go for it. And so behind me is this beautiful piece that she calls Liberation. And we were planning to have a live auction of the piece at the commemorative event, which was scheduled for April 26th. And the other item that was going to be featured at the event was, for all attendees, they would have received this special Yom HaShoah memorial candle. We would have at the event talked about the significance of lighting candles in the Jewish faith and the significance of lighting a Yom HaShoah memorial candle. These in particular are from a special organization, the Yellow Candle Federation of Jewish Men's Clubs, which is headquartered in Florida. This is Lador Vador, the next generation. And so now I have 200 of these candles sitting in boxes in my basement. If anyone would like one now, I would be happy to make a pandemic safe delivery to anyone's doorstep who would like one of these memorial candles for this year to light on April 29th, or a date that is significant to the household, to memorialize and commemorate this year's anniversary, 75th anniversary of the liberation of many concentration camps. The candle could be lit in memory of survivors, in memory of liberators, in memory in general of the terrible thing that occurred and came to allowed people to be liberated 75 years ago.
Lena, obviously, once your parents started talking about their experience at Dachau, you heard the story many, many times, and I'm sure that over time you heard there was probably something new almost every time that you heard it. But if you could you share one thought that maybe was something that they talked about regularly, or something that had a particular impact on you from their story?
They weren't treated as human beings. And that to me is just, I can't even begin to think how my parents had the will to live through all of this. And Dachau was not the only concentration camp they were at. My father was picked up in 39 or early 40 and was shuffled around all across Eastern Europe, over to Russia, Germany, Poland, Czechoslovakia. He was in 19 different concentration camps over 5 years. My mother was in concentration camps for over 4.5 years. They were teenagers. I don't know what gave them the will to live. And it's something to think about now, considering the pandemic that we are experiencing. Some people are frustrated. They can't go to school. They can't go to their offices, and they're frustrated. When I don't want to laugh, but I think if my parents were here, if they were still alive, they would say something like, pandemic, schmandemic. We'll get through this. Don't worry. The fear of the unknown is what is most difficult to manage. My parents lived with this fear of the unknown for many years. Yet they survived because the main thing that gave them the will to live is they every day made a vow to themselves and the people that they were with that they will survive to tell the world what happened, what really happened. And that's what gave them the will to live.
Lena, thanks very much for joining us today, and thanks for helping us make sure that even in the midst of our pandemic that we don't forget events and occurrences like these that, like you said, that show the strength and courage and hope of the human spirit. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Dennis.
You can hear the Culture Crawl live on the radio most weekdays at 10:20, or download the podcast, watch or listen on your own schedule at kcck.org/culture, or using your favorite podcast app. I'm Dennis Green, and I'll talk to you later.